I was 52 years old standing on the sunlit sand at my only daughter's wedding, and for the first time in decades, I felt like an intruder in her life. My name is Grace, and all I had ever been through, every hardship, every broken night of work and sacrifice, was her mother. The one who stayed, the one who gave up her own dreams so she could chase hers. Yet on that golden evening by the ocean, as champagne flutes sparkled in the hands of strangers who laughed easily in their designer clothes, my daughter looked right through me, as if I were nothing more than a shadow at the edge of her new world. I had arrived hours earlier in a pale blue dress, the nicest I owned, bought with 6 months of carefully tucked away tips from the diner where I worked. I had smoothed the fabric nervously in the taxi, whispering to myself that it was good enough that I was good enough. But when I stepped into the manicured resort gardens, where crystal glasses caught the Cape Cod sunlight and roses curled along white chairs facing the sea, I knew the truth. I didn't belong here, not among the wealthy in-laws and their glistening perfection. Rebecca, my daughter met me with a sigh instead of a smile. "Mom, you're late," she said, her eyes barely lifting from her phone. I wanted to hug her to tell her how beautiful she looked in her silk robe, but her words cut me off before the thought could reach my lips. She had her father's sharpness in her tone now, though she hadn't seen him since she was 4 years old. She placed me at table 19 in the far back corner, so far away that even the photographer wouldn't accidentally capture me in the frame. My heart clenched, but I said nothing. For 18 years, I had learned how to swallow pain without choking on it. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. Rebecca glided down the aisle in a gown that cost more than 3 months of my rent, her face glowing with triumph. David, her groom, was the son of a real estate empire, his every gesture polished to perfection. They exchanged vows while I sat alone, my hands folded in my lap, pretending I didn't notice the sideways glances of those around me. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I had dried up years ago, hardened by the countless rejections of a daughter who had slowly rewritten her history without me in it. It was later, during the cocktail hour, when David approached me with 2 glasses of champagne, that the real betrayal revealed itself. For a moment, I almost believed he was extending kindness, bridging the canyon between their world and mine. But his smile never reached his eyes. "Grace," he said smoothly, "Rebecca mentioned you'd be helping with the final wedding costs. 50,000 should cover it." $50,000. I nearly dropped the glass in my hand. My chest tightened with disbelief. "David," I whispered, "I don't have that kind of money." His grin didn't waver, but I saw the flicker of contempt behind his charm. "Grace, let's be honest. Appearances matter in our circles. Rebecca's embarrassed enough by your background. The least you could do is compensate for the inconvenience." Compensate for the inconvenience. As if my years of breaking my back in diners and cleaning houses, of scraping together tuition and giving away my retirement to fund Rebecca's boutique, had been nothing but a nuisance in their perfect lives. Then Rebecca joined us, radiant in her gown, her voice dropping low so only I could hear. "Mom," she said coolly, "it's not much considering what we've done for you. We invited you despite David's parents' reservations. We gave you a seat at the reception. If you can't contribute, maybe it's best we go our separate ways." My world tilted. 18 years of working 3 jobs. Sleepless nights, bone-deep exhaustion, meals skipped so she could eat cupcakes after her spelling bees. My entire retirement drained to give her the chance to stand in this white dress before these people who would never know me. And now, she looked at me with cold blue eyes that used to shine with trust, offering me a choice between paying $50,000 or being erased from her life forever. I stood there, the ocean behind me, the sun melting into gold across the waves, and something inside me shifted. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like begging. I didn't feel like pleading or explaining my worth. I felt calm, centered. A strange clarity settled over me like cool glass after years of fire. I raised the champagne flute to my lips, took a slow sip, and looked my daughter and her new husband directly in the eyes. "You forgot one thing," I whispered. Their smiles faltered, their confidence flickered, and for the first time that day, I saw fear cross their perfect faces. They had no idea what was coming, no idea what I had been preparing for months, no idea that their greed and betrayal had finally woken the part of me that refused to be erased. I stood among the glitter of chandeliers strung across the beach canopy, clutching that glass of champagne like it was a shield. Rebecca and David had drifted away, confident they'd cornered me, their laughter blending with the polished voices of their friends. But inside I was trembling not from fear, but from the weight of everything I had buried for too long. The truth is, this moment hadn't surprised me. It had hurt, yes, like being slapped in front of strangers, but it hadn't shocked me. Because betrayal from Rebecca was no longer new. It had been happening for years, piece by piece, each cut so small that by the time I realized I was bleeding, I was already hollow. When she was little, I was her hero. I was the mother who sewed her costumes from scraps of fabric, who clapped the loudest at her recitals, who stayed up until dawn helping her glue stars to her science fair posters. I remember the way she used to squeeze my hand before stepping on stage, whispering, "Don't let go, Mom." But she started letting go first. Slowly, it was her friends' approval she sought, not mine. Then her teachers, then her boyfriends. I became the embarrassing shadow who wore secondhand clothes and never had the right words to impress her polished world. The first time she really hurt me was her college graduation. I had drained my savings, even borrowed from neighbors to pay for her tuition after scholarships fell short. I had imagined the day for years, me in the stands, Rebecca waving to me as she held her diploma. But when she spotted me in the crowd, she turned away. Later, I overheard her telling her friends that her father had helped with expenses. Her father, the man who disappeared when she was 4, who hadn't paid a cent or sent a birthday card in 2 decades. I stood there invisible as she let them believe his ghost had done what my hands and broken back had actually accomplished. That day, something cracked inside me. And yet, I kept giving. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We give even when it feels like we have nothing left. I poured every cent of my retirement into her dream boutique. I scrubbed floors in strangers' houses, wiping sweat from my brow, convincing myself that one day she'd look back and understand. One day she'd see the cost of her wings was my silence, my exhaustion, my years slipping away in dim diners and dusty kitchens. Now standing at her wedding, the betrayal wasn't just hers. It was generational. Rebecca didn't invent the cruelty, it lived in her blood. Her father had been charming too. I met him when I was 20, a waitress with stars in my eyes, and he was the kind of man who could make promises sound like poetry. He left me with nothing but a baby in my arms and rent unpaid. His family, wealthy and cold, had looked down at me with the same contempt David's parents did now. And maybe Rebecca had inherited more from them than from me. But what none of them knew, not Rebecca, not David, not the guests sipping cocktails by the sea, was that I had spent the last year quietly preparing for this moment. I wasn't stupid. I saw the way Rebecca was changing, the way she treated me like an embarrassment to be hidden. I noticed the strange purchases, the whispers of debt, the desperation behind her perfect smile. I asked questions she brushed aside, so I dug deeper. I had kept copies of every financial statement tied to the boutique, every bank record with my name attached. And what I found was a web of deceit, not just mismanagement, but intentional fraud. Rebecca and David had funneled money from the boutique into accounts under David's family company. My money, my life savings, everything I had sacrificed wasn't just wasted, it had been stolen. That's why when David asked for $50,000, I didn't break. Because I had already realized that what they wanted from me was endless. They didn't want a mother, they wanted a resource. And I had finally decided I wouldn't play that role anymore. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the sand, I rose from my lonely table. My heart was steady now, my steps deliberate. I could hear the band tuning up for their first dance, the guests gathering with excitement. Rebecca twirled in her gown, David kissed her hand, and cameras flashed like fireworks. They looked untouchable, the golden couple of the hour. But I knew the truth. And in my clutch bag, tucked neatly between tissues and lipstick, I carried the folder that could burn their illusion to the ground. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my worth, my voice. For too long, I had been silent, invisible, dismissed. Tonight, under the fairy lights and the gaze of everyone they had sought to impress, I would no longer be erased. The music swelled as the first notes of their chosen song spilled across the beach, mingling with the sound of waves curling against the shore. Guests gathered in a loose circle around the dance floor, phones lifted to capture the perfect moment. Rebecca rested her head against David's shoulder, her white gown swaying like foam on the water, her smile radiant and rehearsed. To anyone watching, they looked like a picture torn from a bridal magazine, effortless, glowing, enviable. But I knew better. Behind that smile lay rot. Behind that perfect twirl of silk and sparkle was the truth of stolen money, manipulated trust, and a daughter who had long since decided her mother was disposable. I sat back in my chair for a moment longer, watching them spin to applause, and it felt like a funeral to me. Not the funeral of my daughter, she had been gone in spirit for years, but the funeral of the hope I had clung to that she might one day come back to me. When the music ended and the clinking of glasses echoed with cheers for a kiss, I rose to my feet. My knees trembled slightly, not from age, but from the enormity of what I was about to do. I pressed the clutch bag tighter under my arm, feeling the edges of the folder inside sharp as a blade. I wasn't just carrying paper, I was carrying the weight of my sacrifices, the silent screams of every night I had gone hungry, so Rebecca could eat the invisible ledger of debts my heart had never been repaid for. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, announcing it was time for toasts. Laughter rippled through the crowd as the best man stepped forward, delivering jokes polished with charm. Then David's mother spoke her pearls, gleaming her words dripping with condescension disguised as pride. She looked at me once, her gaze cool and dismissive, as though daring me to open my mouth. My pulse roared in my ears. Pulse. Finally, the microphone was offered to me. A hush fell, polite but strained. I could feel Rebecca's eyes on me, sharp and warning like daggers pressed against my skin. She didn't want me to speak. God forbid her guests hear my voice unpolished and raw. But I stepped forward anyway, the sand crunching beneath my shoes, the sea wind tugging at my dress. I took the microphone in my hand and let the silence stretch until it was heavy. Then I smiled, small, deliberate, and said, "When I was invited here today, I was asked to contribute something. And I realized I have far more to contribute than anyone expected." Murmurs flickered through the crowd. Rebecca stiffened, her painted smile faltering, while David reached for her hand. I opened the clutch and drew out the folder, holding it up like scripture. My hands no longer shook. "This," I continued, my voice steady, "is the story of how my life savings, everything I worked for, everything I bled for, was funneled into accounts controlled by this couple. My daughter and her new husband." Gasps erupted. Phones dropped. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But I pressed on, pulling out copies of bank statements, copies of contracts with my signature, attached the evidence of what they had stolen. While you all toasted to their future, I was meant to stay quiet, invisible. But today is not only their wedding day, it's also the day their lies are laid bare. Rebecca's face blanched, her lips moving soundlessly. David tried to step forward, his voice raised, but the weight of the murmuring crowd drowned him out. Guests surged closer, eyes wide, phones lifted, not for romance now, but for scandal. The master of ceremonies stammered, unsure whether to intervene. For once, I didn't back down. I looked at Rebecca, my daughter, and saw not the child who once clung to my hand, but the woman who had chosen greed over love. My heart ached, but my spine was steel. "You asked me for $50,000 today," I said, my tone low, but carrying. "Instead, I give you the truth." The silence that followed was electric charged, like the air before a storm. Rebecca's hands shook at her sides, and David's smile was gone, replaced by the sneer of a man cornered. Their perfect wedding had cracked open, and there was no way to piece it back together. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small, I didn't feel erased, I felt alive. The crowd erupted like a wave crashing against the shore. Voices overlapped in disbelief, guests whispering, gasping, some pulling out their phones to snap pictures of the papers fluttering in my hands. Rebecca staggered forward, her veil trembling around her like it was caught in a storm. "Mom, stop this!" she hissed, her voice breaking for the first time all day. But there was no stopping what had already begun. I looked at her and felt the sharp sting of grief pierce my chest. She wasn't my little girl anymore, the one who once clutched my hand at school gates and cried into my shoulder after nightmares. That girl had vanished somewhere between ambition and greed, replaced by this stranger in a white gown who saw her mother as an obstacle. I mourned her even as I spoke. "Everything I gave you," I said, my voice carrying through the mic and across the stunned faces, "was meant to build your dreams. But you sold me for status. You sold me for him." I pointed at David, who stood pale and furious, tugging at his tie as if it might strangle him. His parents had gone rigid, their faces masks of horror, no longer able to pretend this was just another glamorous night by the sea. The resort manager moved closer, clearly nervous, but no one dared pull me off stage. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't hysterical. I was calm, too calm. That made them listen. I dropped the final blow. Then, "These documents have already been sent to my lawyer, to the authorities, and to the press. So even if you tear them from my hands tonight, the truth will still find you." Chaos followed. Guests erupted into shouts, some backing away, others pressing closer, their curiosity sharper than pity. Rebecca let out a strangled cry, clutching David's arm, but he only shook her off. His face twisted in anger. I saw in that moment the truth she refused to admit. He didn't love her. She was his pawn just as much as I had been. I placed the microphone gently on the table, closed my clutch, and walked away. Not hurried, not ashamed. Every step on that sand felt like shedding years of invisibility. I passed the rows of white chairs, the roses, the candles flickering in the twilight, and for once, nobody looked through me. They looked at me. Behind me, the wedding fell apart. Voices rose, accusations flew. Rebecca screamed my name in fury, but I didn't turn back. The ocean stretched before me, endless and calm, as if it had been waiting all along to carry away the echoes of my silence. Later, alone in my small motel room, miles from the resort, I sat on the edge of the bed in my pale blue dress, listening to the waves outside my window. My phone buzzed, endlessly missed calls from relatives, from numbers I didn't recognize, from Rebecca herself. I turned it face down on the nightstand and let the darkness swallow the sound. For the first time in years, I felt light. Empty, yes, but the kind of empty that leaves space for something new to grow. I poured myself a glass of water from the sink, toasted the lonely reflection in the window, and whispered, "To survival." But even in the quiet, my heart ached with the truth I couldn't escape. I hadn't just exposed Rebecca and David. I had buried the last fragile thread that tied my daughter to me. The next morning, headlines had already begun to spread. Bride and groom accused of financial fraud at lavish beach wedding. Photos of Rebecca's tear-streaked face and David's clenched fists flooded social media. Reporters dug deeper, uncovering more than I had imagined: David's shady deals, Rebecca's complicit silence, the debts hidden under their perfect facade. My name appeared too. Mother of the bride reveals truth. I should have felt vindicated, and I did in part, but I also felt hollow, because no amount of justice could give me back my daughter. Yet maybe that was the point. Some endings aren't about reclaiming what's lost. Some are about walking away before you lose yourself too. Days turned into weeks, and the storm I had unleashed only grew. Reporters called me, brave guests from the wedding gave anonymous interviews, and David's family scrambled to bury the scandal, but it was too late. Investigations were opened, bank accounts frozen, and the boutique that had once carried Rebecca's name was shuttered overnight. They had built their world on deception, and now it was crumbling into sand. I watched it all from a distance. From my little apartment above the diner where I still worked, I saw their empire collapse piece by piece. Some people told me I should feel triumphant, that I had gotten the ultimate revenge. But sitting there with my apron still damp from dishwater, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a mother who had finally admitted her daughter was gone long before the wedding day ever arrived. Rebecca never came to me, not to apologize, not to rage, not even to explain. The last time I heard her voice was on a voicemail the night of the wedding, her sobs tangled with fury. You ruined everything. I listened once, then deleted it. Because the truth was, I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply stopped pretending. And yet, even in the quiet aftermath, I mourned. I mourned the child who once curled up in my lap with bedtime stories. I mourned the teenager who used to whisper her secrets to me on long drives. I mourned the hope that someday, no matter how far she drifted, she would remember who had carried her through the storms of childhood. That hope was gone now, replaced by a bittersweet peace. One evening after a long shift, I walked down to the beach near my apartment. The waves whispered against the shore just as they had on Rebecca's wedding day. I thought about how I had walked away from her beneath those same sounds, carrying nothing but the truth. And for the first time, I let the tears come not for the loss, but for the release. Because here's what I've learned: sometimes love means letting go, even when it breaks you. Sometimes the deepest betrayal gives you the clearest vision. I couldn't save Rebecca from herself, and I couldn't rewrite the choices she made. But I could save myself from silence, from erasure, from being used until nothing was left. If you're listening to me now, maybe you've carried a betrayal like this too. Maybe you've been dismissed, overlooked, or made to feel small by those you loved most. I want you to know you are not invisible. You don't have to keep swallowing your pain just to keep someone else comfortable. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak, even if your voice shakes, even if it means standing alone. At my daughter's wedding, I was asked to give $50,000. Instead, I gave them the truth. And though it cost me the bond I had spent my life building, it gave me something far greater myself. So if my story has touched you, if it reminds you of a wound you've carried, don't stay quiet. Like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep telling the stories others want to bury. And if you have a story of betrayal, revenge, or truth finally spoken, leave it in the comments. I promise I'll be reading.